Hi guys, this is gsn.com and I'm here with the Oppo A72 for a full review. We're dealing with a mid-range phone which has a very good looking backside, which goes from purple to green, and it's priced at only $300. It brings a quad camera, a familiar CPU which is the Qualcomm Snapdragon 665, and we're about to see what it offered us throughout the week we spent with it. Okay, so aside from the hue we have here, there are other versions, Twilight Black. There's also a special version of white and sky blue. This is supposed to be the Aurora Purple. Now, just so you know, the facade is covered with glass. It also has Gorilla Glass protection, and the back side is all plastic, but a good looking kind of plastic. And the build is, I would say, decent. This backside draws some fingerprints, but you also get a bundled case, so that saves the trouble. It's transparent, so it leaves the beautiful color visible. 8.9mm in thickness, and also a weight of 192 grams. The backside is slightly curved, so it fits better in your palm. Okay, so moving further from that aspect, it's time to talk about the screen. The display you're seeing here, it's an IPS LCD with a resolution of it's an IPS LCD with a diagonal of 6.5 inches and a resolution of 2400 over 1080 pixels. It's got Gorilla Glass 3 protection, and also the bezels aren't very thick. Even the chin is decent for the price segment. Okay, so as usual, we're about to test the screen, submitting it to a, well, video watching experience. And I have to say, the punch hole for the selfie camera doesn't bother me. It's placed in a pretty unobtrusive way, so that's nice. Now, the experience, well, it's symmetrical bezel wise, and I'm also pretty much digging the brightness, the colors. We got decently wide view angles, and the colors were pretty well calibrated. I would also say that the contrast was okay in the sunlight, and the pixel arrangement is of the RGB straps variety. Now, believe it or not, even though it seemed like a satisfying screen, when we did our test, we had a pretty low result when it comes to the brightness. This is the lux level we achieved. We achieved 398 lux units. Usually the threshold that we consider good is 400 lux, so it's just below it. At the same time, in real life it feels a bit higher. Now, with this value we surpassed Motorola One Macro, and the Xiaomi Redmi Note 8T stayed below the Galaxy A31 and A41, also below the Huawei P40 Lite. Okay, so we're done with the screen. Now it's time to go truly inside the handset and see what lays there. Okay, so the Oppo A72 comes with a Qualcomm Snapdragon 665 processor, which is accompanied by 4 gigs of RAM and 128 gigabytes of storage, which feels decently generous. It also has a microSD card slot, and I didn't experience lag per se, but every once in a while there was a little bit of a slowdown that came out of nowhere. Doesn't happen all the time, and I even played PUBG on it, which you can see here, and it has a pretty decent experience if you're not willing to take all the details to the max, but rather opt for a smooth option experience. Now, we did a bunch of benchmarks, and we also have those here. Of course, expectations weren't high. It's a Snapdragon 665 after all, which is an 11 nanometer chip, and this is on 228. This is the result we delivered, just above the Galaxy A41 and Motorola One Macro, and just below, let's see, Moto G8 Power and Nokia 7.2. You will see us gravitating around these phones in all of the benchmarks. We're basically about below or above Moto G8 Power and Nokia 7.2. This is the graphical, the GPU test. We're just above the Xiaomi Mi A3 and Redmi Note 8T, and at the same time we should also be below, let's see here, the Moto G8 Power, as I said before, and Xperia 10 II. Now, another relevant test is the famous Geekbench 5. In the multi-core subtest, we even beat the Galaxy A51, which is a surprise for me, also Nokia 6.2, at the same time remaining below the Xperia 10 II and Moto G8 Power. So gravitating around similar CPU phones. Okay, so I think we're about done with that. We also have some good news. They're related to the temperature. In benchmarks, 32.7 degrees Celsius, so there's no overheating, and in games 36.5 degrees Celsius. Once again, no trace of overheating. So inside the phone we should have a pretty decent battery, if not even beefy, 5000 mAh with 18 watt charging, and let's see how it performed in our test, because we also did that test. So We start off with video playback, with a pretty solid 15 hours and 58 minutes. Now, it's not a record breaker, but it's definitely good. It's above the Huawei P40 Lite and Motorola One Zoom, also the Galaxy A51, if you can believe it. At the same time, it stays below the Xiaomi Mi A3 and the Xperia 10 II, which was a beast when it comes to video playback. Continuous usage is 14 hours and 17 minutes, just above the battery phone Zenfone Max Pro M2 from Asus, and also beating a heavyweight like the Huawei P40 Pro, Motorola One Macro also beaten. However, it's below the Xiaomi Mi A3 and the LG Velvet, to name just two of them. Still, it's on the 29th spot, so that's solid. I was disappointed by the charging, which is long at 2 hours and 36 minutes. We're supposed to have a fast charger, 18 watts, and expected a bit more. After 1 hour, you're at 51%. Okay, now let's talk about the speakers. The biggest surprise is that we have a stereo setup here. So this is the bottom speaker and this is the top speaker, and they work pretty well together. So we should probably show you an audio sample. Okay, so let's listen to some tunes. We got this one here, so here we go. Okay, so a bunch of conclusions. Not much of a bass, but I love the stereophony of the speakers. Also, very good highs and a pretty nice voice. Those are the things that were well rendered by these speakers here. Okay, we also tested the power of the volume with a decibel meter, and we achieved 85 decibels at the bottom and 83.6 decibel at the top. This was with a special acoustic sample, and we beat the Motorola One Action and the Galaxy A50, so not bad. The biggest surprise was the multimedia test, which is basically also the gaming test. 103.5 decibels, were top 15, were beating even gaming phones, so that's nice. We even beat the Asus ROG Phone 3, not bad at all. Okay, now it's time to talk about the camera. You can already see one of them here. It's cut in a punch hole in the screen. It's a 16 megapixel shooter. And then we go to the back side where we find a quad camera in a familiar arrangement, LED flash here, and then there are 4 cameras. So main one, 48 megapixel, face detection autofocus, 8 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel bokeh, and a 2 megapixel black and white camera, even though personally I was expecting a dedicated macro camera. Believe it or not, you can still take solid macro shots even without a macro camera. I'm going to explain in a minute. Okay, so we have quite a few shots here, so let's actually take them each at a time, explain them, detail them, and simply talk about them. Okay, so they were taken on a very hot September day. There are still 31 degrees Celsius even on this day. There are differences between the main camera and the ultra-wide camera. Obviously, the images are a bit whiter and well, more washed out and with less details. In general, the colors felt a bit too vivid for my taste, and there was a slight tendency to overexpose and mess up the dynamic range. This camera tells a story of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, because sometimes it's very good and solid, and sometimes it's a bit underwhelming. Sometimes it's Nokia 7.2 and sometimes it's Galaxy A51 or even A71, so that's got to count for something. Okay, so for example, this is actually a red toy which I saw in the park, and here it's rendered as pink. But believe it or not, the ultra-wide camera caught it with a proper red. So this is the actual real red you should see, true red, but the main camera sees it as a sort of pink. Okay, so aside from that aspect, I would say that the camera really shines when it comes to taking close-ups. I mean, the details are very solid, and the AI detects you're in a macro situation, so you actually do not need a macro camera. And the flower shots were pretty impressive too. This time the colors didn't get messed up, so there's that. There's another appealing thing about the camera. It can take a bunch of pretty solid bokeh shots. This is one of them. And we also have one with Winnie the Pooh. It separates the subject from the background in an excellent manner. This happens with the back camera, and the bokeh with the front camera is also not half bad. Okay, so oftentimes I was underwhelmed by the selfies. My face is way too white compared to real life, but I love the way the eyes are captured, the expression of the eyes. Sometimes the camera can mess up the focus and also mess up the distance. You should really be careful how far you're keeping this camera away from your head, otherwise you're going to run into the same situation as the Galaxy A50, which had a weird focus on the background, not your face. Get the proper distance, get a bokeh, and you should be all about done. The best photo taken with this phone is probably this one of a pigeon. It's actually a series of shots. It delivers an excellent texture of the bird, and believe it or not, the zoom is not half bad here when you're putting it to use. So, 3 aspects about the camera that are good: bokeh, macro, and texture. The colors are a bit messed up and it's a bit hit and miss, including with the selfies. This is daytime capture, and we also have a low light capture. Let's actually go to the actual camera, not mess around in the screenshots. As expected, we are still dealing, after all, with a mid-range phone, actually low mid-range phone, and this shows in these pictures. Even though it captured more light than I would have expected, it's obvious that the main camera shots are actually decent when it comes to the light sources, but if you're taking an ultra-wide shot, the street light halos are too big and the colors are a bit weird. So that's something to remember. Okay, even more shots here. As you can see, the shade of yellow of the illumination changes once you switch between cameras. Definitely stick to the 48 megapixel one, which is actually good. If you look at the details, the clarity and the quantity of light. Ultra wide, not that good. Okay, so as usual, if you're going to talk about video, I'm going to resort to a special app so we don't have to navigate in the camera. I'm pretty underwhelmed by the video, have to say it. Believe it or not, the selfie video is actually pretty okay, but in general I filmed in 4K and the stabilization doesn't handle the heat. The best thing about it is that we have a pretty nice... Okay, let's turn down the volume. There were some people working in the park. The autofocus is pretty snappy, focus on the background and foreground and alternating between them with zero problems. Okay, and let's see what else. This is a stabilization test. Started out okay, lost focus along the way, and as you can see, the colors are truly vivid, exaggeratedly vivid, almost radioactive. So that's another problem of the camera, which I also mentioned in the photo department. Okay, selfie video, surprisingly good, I would say. I mean, with what we're working, so 16 megapixel full HD, I would say not bad. I know it's not the best stabilization in the world, but still didn't lose focus, so there's that. Okay, we have a bunch of 4K videos which are pretty shaky, and once again the reds are pink. There's a nice way of changing the exposure when you switch between light and shadow, so that's a plus. But in general, it feels closer to a mid-ranger Nokia rather than a mid-range Samsung phone. We remain with a good focus and I would say pretty decent details in the 4K capture. As usual, low light video is a challenge. It's a challenge for some flagships, definitely for mid-range phones. It's shaky, it's got a lot of noise, but the colors aren't the worst in the world. Still not very usable for social media. Okay, we're about done with the whole camera thing, and I think it's time to talk about other things, like for example connectivity. Obviously we're dealing with a dual SIM handset here, one that delivers 4G LTE, Wi-Fi dual band, Bluetooth 5.0, GPS, GLONASS, Galileo BDS, an USB-C port at the bottom, and also it has an audio jack plus NFC. Okay, the calls were pretty loud and clear in my book, and we also did a bunch of tests, speed tests that is, on 4G and Wi-Fi, and these are the results. The best result we achieved on Wi-Fi was 246 megabits in download, 24.8 megabits upload, and on LTE on 4G 171 to 64.1. These are excellent values, close to flagship values, so I'm actually pretty happy with the results. Now let's talk about the software. Okay, so we're running on Android 10 with something called ColorOS 7.1 applied on top of it. The leftmost home screen is dedicated to Google and its newsfeed. And if you want multitasking, it's typical, and it involves, let's open up more apps. Okay, and it involves a carousel of applications which are used like this. You also have split screen multitasking, and there's another level of multitasking here. There's always floating on the screen this little thingy here. It's a white bar which is vertical, and if you do something like this gesture, it triggers a bunch of shortcuts like screenshot and screen recording, but it can also deliver floating windows which you should be able to move, tap anywhere outside the floating window to close it. Okay, we should also be able to move it around the calculator. I'm pretty sure I can move it here and open even more and overlap them, so you can do real multitasking like this. And I can see my I can see my files, and I can also do some calculus and also split the screen and get more done. Now, the interface itself is pretty reminiscent to a typical Chinese UI on top of Android. I mean, it's rather similar to what you're getting on Xiaomi's MIUI. There's a very clean area here for notifications and quick settings. I like these green hues on top of these angular icons. They're pretty well done and very minimalistic. We have the app drawer with the apps arranged in an alphabetic fashion. And also we have pre-installed Loop, which is an app used to create collages of videos, photos and more, with a bunch of effects, trimming, cropping and filters. Okay, aside from that, if you go to the settings, the list is pretty generous. You can tweak the display settings, the sound settings, the fingerprint scanner, face unlock. There's also here, we have a software update, of course. There's the digital well-being, there's the game space for gamers, split screen app cloner, which works for Facebook, probably for WhatsApp as well. Okay, and that's about it. If you pinch the screen, you're going to the widgets, and most of them are the stock ones, stock from Android. Okay, I didn't think I forgot anything, so that's about it. Among the useful apps, well, we have Game Space, as I said before. We also have Oppo Relax, which really helps you chill, Opera as a browser, Office Suite, and well, also have a manager here, the phone manager, which is useful to manage your phone's resources. Okay, a bunch of gaming now towards the end. You saw me before having the PUBG app open. I'm going to be quick about it, hopefully, and start a match. Well, as I'm playing the game, just to show you how it's done and if it works well or not on this device, I'm going to list the pros and cons of buying the Oppo A72. On the pro side, it has stereo speakers, which, to be honest, they truly deliver. Also, the back side is good looking, and people are already shooting each other here. Okay, so once again, on the pro side, beautiful looking back. We have the stereo speakers, which are always a plus, and the screen colors aren't that bad, so those are in the pros. Pretty good bokeh and macro shots, nice details in the 4K capture, and the low light shots with the main camera aren't that bad. Okay, we're fragging people here, and I have to say that the battery life was satisfying. The performance was okay for a mid-range phone, doesn't break records, but at the same time I'm playing PUBG without too much of a hassle. And the speakers were loud, the interface is growing on me, ColorOS, more than I expected. The 4K videos look nice, selfie video was a bit above expectations, and connectivity is fast. Those are the pros. I'm done with the list. Now, if you want to talk about the cons, obviously the charging is a bit longer than expected, and compared to what we were promised when I heard that we were getting 18-watt charging. The screen is not that bright if you look at our lux meter test, and I should probably mention that the ultra-wide shots are underwhelming, and in general the camera plays the game of Jekyll and Hyde. Sometimes it's very good, other times not as good, especially in the selfie department. It's a bit hit and miss every now and then. Okay, some focus problems in videos, not the best stabilization in the world, and well, that's pretty much it. So the drawbacks are related to the camera and charging, and maybe the screen brightness, but in real life it didn't bother me too much, so that's got to count for something. So considering this phone can take nice bokeh shots and also nice macro shots, and considering you can play PUBG on it and it has loud stereo speakers, it's obviously a phone for youngsters. If you add the beautiful looking back, it's clear what we're getting into here. Macro, bokeh, battery, stereo speakers, gaming. It's a phone for people around, I don't know, something between 16 years old and 25 years old. That's about it. The price also suits that segment, $300, and we're pretty much done with the review. here. It can definitely beat the Nokia mid-rangers like Nokia 6.2 and 7.2, definitely. Solid rival for the Huawei P40 Lite, but a bit below the Galaxy A series. This is it from us. Bye bye.